Hi, everyone. Welcome to our EWPN event today. I'm Regina Lau, and I'm on the board of EWPN. For those of you who are new to us, the European Women Payments Network is the first and only pan-European community for women. We're focused on fintech and payments. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the fintech community. You can learn more about our programs and membership at ewpn.eu. And today, we're very excited to host a fireside chat about marketing and customer insights. Joining us are Dr. Christine Bailey and Astrid Masle-Boer. Chris is founder of Sophia Marketing and CMO at Passport. She's held many B2B marketing roles in both tech and fintech companies. And she's a TEDx speaker. We're also very excited to introduce Astrid as our moderator. She's an accomplished global senior executive who successfully built teams to grow companies profitably and also innovate technical and operational solutions. Like Chris, Astrid has also worked in both tech and fintech companies. And so, just before we start, a bit of housekeeping. If you can please mute your microphones, that would be great. We'll take questions at the end of the panel, but you can type in your questions and comments in the chat function at any time during the event. We'll also record today's event and send you the link afterwards. And now I'll turn it over to you, Astrid.
Thanks, Regina. And welcome everyone to this call. I think we'll all agree that COVID has changed the way we all work and live. Some things for the good, some things, we'll see if we can do better. But one of the things that we probably all agree on is how digital has become even more important in our lives. As I was preparing for this call with Christine, one of the things that really struck me is how sometimes it can just be overwhelming how much data we have, or how much, I'll call them household items like your laptop, how much they can actually do. And if you're like me, you probably only use 10% of what a laptop is meant to do, whether you're using Excel. If you're to the level where you can actually use the pivot tables and do VLOOKUPs, then you're probably using more than the average person. If you get, much more than that, there are very few that get to that level. And one of the things that Christine talks about in her book is that 83% of marketeers are just blinded by the sheer amount of data that's available to them. And what do you do with that data? Because it's so valuable. And for that reason, what I've asked Christine to do is first to set the stage, and then I'll ask her some questions. And at the end, or please during the call, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get them. Because what Christine wants all of us to do is to be able to provide remarkable marketing. Christine, please go ahead and set the scene.
Thank you, Astrid. Right, let's get some slides up on the screen. So coming. Now, can I just check that you're seeing the full screen mode, are you, or not?
No.
No, okay, let's just try again with the share. Here we go. Let me try again.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just get. Okay, so all good. You're looking at the full screen mode, are you? Sorry, it should be.
Yes, we are.
How to turn. Okay. Yes. Okay, great. So you're in the right place if you've come to hear about how to turn customer data and insights into remarkable marketing. And as Astrid said in the beginning, we've got more data at our fingertips, haven't we, than at any other point in history. And we were already living in a digitally connected world, and then along came COVID. So I don't know about you, but I haven't taken public transport probably since about March 2020. But if I was sitting on the tube, then it would be more likely on the picture on the right, where everybody's looking at their mobile phones rather than reading the newspaper. And we've got about 2/3 of the world's population now online. And if you look at the internet users between the ages of 16 and 64, 99% of those users are using social media. And that's been a massive increase actually since COVID, is in the increase of social media. So lots and lots of data. People are using data to shop and be on social media and all sorts of reasons. And what does this explosion of data mean for us as marketeers? Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this infographic from Domo, which is called Data Never Sleeps. This is about the 8th or 9th version that they produced of this, and the last one was last August, so they're just due to do another one. But last year, these mind-boggling stats shows you what goes online every single minute in the world. And last August, so this was just at the beginning really of the pandemic, they identified 3 key trends. And the first one is the future of work is at home for now. Who knew that it would go on so long? But we'd gone from about 15% of people working at home to 50% of people working at home. And that was last August. I'm sure the stat went up in the meantime. And even though things are starting to open up for us here back in the UK, I'm sure that we're never going to go back to only 15% of people working from home. It's just there's been, a seismic change in how people work. The second one was around FaceTime. So there was a 51% increase in people using WhatsApp video, and everybody was communicating with their friends and family using WhatsApp. And in actual fact, I was on a marketing conference last week, and one of the questions was, have we all got Zoom fatigue because of so many meetings online? And I said, could we just pause for a moment to appreciate as marketers what you've just said there? We've got Zoom fatigue. That means that has now entered our vocabulary in the same way that you would say, let's just Google it, or, my house is dirty, I'm going to hoover, hoover up the mess. We now actually have an expression of Zoom fatigue that is not just about Zoom, it's about any kind of online video conferencing. So, a bit of kudos there to what the marketers at Zoom have achieved in dominating their category. So that's the second one. And the third one is they called it curl up with quarantine. So I don't know about you, but mostly on Facebook throughout the lockdown, instead of sharing all the places I'd eaten at or been to, everyone was asking for tips on, what we should be watching next on Netflix. So those were the three trends. But, what is all of this data, of course, is producing a lot of technology that we can use to analyze that data. So you're probably familiar with this MarTech landscape, which is something created by Scott Brinker, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. So he updates it every year. This was last April, the last version, 8,000 different types of marketing technologies. How do we even begin to start thinking through which of these technologies are we going to use to make the most out of our data? And no surprise to me, the fastest growing category of technologies was data, so 25%. And as Astrid said earlier, we've got all this data, but 83% of marketers feel data blind just by the sheer volume of data that they have at their fingertips. Which poses the really big question, why should we care? Why do customer insights actually matter? And I like to think of this in the Eisenhower box, where we say, what's urgent and what's important. And as Eisenhower said, what's important is seldom urgent, and what's urgent is seldom important. And as marketers, we get very locked in that box, which is the critical and immediate do it now task. That's the salespeople in our organization saying, I need something now. I need more leads. I need a seminar. I need more digital. I need more whatever, insert it. But we get very locked in that critical and immediate do it now box. Whereas in actual fact, to really truly understand our insights and get the most value out of them, and for a longer term strategy, we need to focus on that urgent but not critical, as in this moment of time. Still very, very important, and that's what we need our insights for, to help us with the longer term strategy. And is there a pot of gold for those that do use customer insights? Absolutely. And as Forbes said just recently, the pandemic has shown us customers rule. It's never been more important to understand changing customer behavior, because how your customers behaved yesterday or last week or the month before is changing constantly. It might not even be how they change tomorrow. So how do we keep on top of what our customers are thinking and how they're behaving? And there's a lot of research to prove that using insights will make you a better marketer. I like this one from eConsultancy, which did a correlation of the amount of first-party data and third-party data that marketers were using and the ability to exceed their marketing goals. And no surprise, those that were using the first and third-party data were more likely to exceed their marketing goals. And the last one I thought was quite interesting because in terms of, the value to the company, not just the value to us as marketers of using insights, is if you use insights to really understand your purpose and your vision and your value proposition, you're likely to outperform the stock market by 42%. So lots of goodness in there. And there's another reason. Data creates certainty. I like to think that we're not just going to make up those data points. So as my funny, my little graphic cartoon shows, 86.4% of people will believe any data you put in a PowerPoint slide, even if you just totally made it up to prove your point. I promise I'm not making up my data points. But in a very uncertain world, data does create certainty, and we have been conditioned to believe that the more points of evidence we have, the more likely we are to influence people. But joking aside, where are we going to get our data from? So when I published my doctorate in 2008, I identified 5 key sources of data. And when I came to write the book more recently, I thought, well, are those still true today from 2008? And actually, very much so. So we've still got 5 main sources of data: competitors, customers, markets, employees, and channel partners. But the category I think that's changed most dramatically since 2008 is the customer one. And I think there's 3 key differences that have happened in recent years. The first one is at least 2/3 of the buying journey happens online. And I think since the pandemic, it's like nobody has measured it again, but it's likely to be more than 2/3 of the buying journey that's happened online. People are doing a lot of their research before they've even spoken to a salesperson. And that is leaving enormous volumes also of digital footprint data. So that's a big change. The second one is that people are talking instead of typing and reading. We're transitioning to a world of speaking and listening. And again, the data reportal stats that I devour every quarter show that there's been an enormous increase in the amount of voice searches in the last month. We're all spending a lot of time on our computers, aren't we? And so we're doing more on voice search. And this is also a generational thing. The younger generation are more likely to talk to Siri and to Google Assistant. So that's another big trend. And the third one is artificial intelligence being used not just more and more in marketing, but across just about every area, but certainly in marketing, and creating a lot more certainty and evidence than we had before. So data is only data and not terribly useful until we can turn it into insights. So how are we doing that? So those 4 types of data, I think we're turning into 4 different types of insights: market predictions, customer segments, propensity models, and customer analytics. And those are being used right across the organization. But if we just think today specifically about how we're using them in marketing, the sort of 4 main areas: how do we create a mission statement with purpose and a value proposition that matters to customers? And how do we use insights to inform our brand strategy? The second major one is about how do we create segments and personas? And I don't think you can create segments and personas now without using customer insights. And then the 4th one, lead generation. And you could write an entire book on how to do lead generation or customer acquisition. And I identified what I thought were 4 game changers that were being influenced by customer insights in the area of customer acquisition. And then the last one, sorry, I've done them in a different order, to create content and thought leadership. We should use insights to create the right kind of content and to make sure that that content is performing and we've got the right kind of content for the right stage of the customer journey. And I kind of stop there. Customer analytics also very important for cross-sell and upsell. But what I'm going to do there, I'm going to pause now and I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go to Astrid to start grilling me.
No, it's fascinating. It's no grilling, but we can talk about this all day, like you said, because it has such an impact on all of us. regardless of whether you work at a small growing, a scale up, or something, a large corporate. I think all these things are relevant. So my first question would actually be, what prompted you to write a book after all these years? Because I remember in our conversation, you'd actually said, well, life got in the way. And I think many of us recognize that. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what actually prompted you to sit down and write this book, which is so helpful for many of us?
So when I did the doctorate in 2008, I fully intended to publish a book after I'd written the doctorate. But as it turned out, I was 9 months pregnant and got offered a fabulous job at Cisco just as I was handing in my thesis. So those were the life events that majorly got in the way. But then I came to it later on, actually. I was speaking at a conference, and a scout, if we can use the term, trendy term, came up to me from Kogan Page and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, actually, yes, I have. So it took me 12 years to publish the book, with COVID as well getting in the way, but I like to think it's a much better book now. And I also got the opportunity to interview 33 practitioners and academics from around the world, because I've really wanted it to be a book for practitioners, written by practitioners, and not just something that was theoretical, but really with lots of case studies and lots of experts' opinions, and really lots of ideas. There's a section in the back of the book of, well, the key takeaways, but also a section called Feed Your Brain, which gives you some ideas of things that you can do immediately.
Okay, so the one thing the phrase that stuck with me, other than the fact that, what was it, like 84% of the data is actually made up, or people believe that the data they see on the screen, so that one I'm going to remember and be very critical for whatever data I'm shown. But it's the remarkable marketing piece that just stands out, because all of us can probably name a commercial that we see on television, or maybe it pops on your screen. But what if those companies, it's so elusive because there's so much marketing out there. So can you tell me a little bit more about how do you create that remarkable piece that you refer to? If I were to pick 3 things, what would you focus on?
So if we set the scene, we're drowning in a sea of sameness, aren't we? It's very difficult to stand out. And people tend to focus on being better, faster, cheaper, whereas really the thing to focus on is being different. And that's what we can use our insights for, is to really be different, and to help us humanize our marketing as well, because that's something else that will help us stand out. And if we're really clear about why we're doing something, what's our mission or our purpose, that is more than just, it's that emotional connection, more than just making money, that's what will help us stand out. And I love a TED talk from Simon Sinek called Finding Your Why. And what he says is that companies are very good at saying what they do and how they do it, but they're not good at saying why they do it. And I would add on, companies are good at saying what they do and how they do it, but they're not good at saying who they are in a really differentiated way, as well as saying why they do it. And yeah, if I can say that, how you stand out in a sea of sameness is by being different.
And how would you encourage the listeners on this call to align to that kind of messaging?
Well, I think it's a good way of thinking about it is, what kind of problems are you trying to solve? And how are you trying to solve them uniquely? And is it a problem that everybody is familiar with and it's obvious, you just found a new way of solving that problem? Or is it a problem that people actually, they didn't even realize that they had? And if I give an example of both of those, actually, a problem that people didn't realize could be solved in a different way. Think about Uber. Can you remember a day? Actually, there's another marketer's category, where we just say, I'll Uber it, instead of saying I'll take a taxi. But the problem of standing on a street corner in the pouring rain and not having any idea if there was in London a black cab round the corner, that problem existed. But Uber found a new and unique way to solve it. So that's one example. Another example is people haven't even imagined it. If you'd have asked the Ford motor car customers, way back when, what is it that you want? They'd have said, we want a faster horse. They wouldn't have said we want a motor car, because, nobody had thought of that. And that's, what Hayden Christensen's classic innovator's dilemma is how do you get people to think of something that nobody has yet, the car, the motor car replacing the faster horse. So where are these things going to come from? Well, they're both going to come from insights, but it's either going to come from a market insight. So that's where you've got the first scenario where I said, here's a problem, and we found a new way to solve it using technology. So that will be coming from a market insight, or it could be a technology insight. So somebody's invented an amazing new technology, cloud computing, virtualization, quantum, artificial intelligence, things like that. But nobody's really imagined what the use cases would be for that. So a category king is going to emerge when they talk about, what are the use cases for this? But just kind of bring it back to how you could think about this in your marketing. If you're like saying, well, I'm already with an established company, but you will most likely be in this sea of sameness. So think again about what's the problem you're trying to solve? Is it a problem that is well known and you found a new way to solve it? Or is it a problem that people haven't even thought that, is a problem and could be solved that way? So try and write down, okay, what is the problem that my company is trying to solve? And how are we solving that uniquely? And those becomes your differentiators, i.e. how you're different from everybody else. And then obviously you need to start loading it in with lots of evidence and data points. But first of all, think of that, how are we different?
And would you align that messaging, or would you do a check-in with your consumers, your customers, to see if that actually matches what they're thinking of?
Yes. So again, depending how much time and resources you've got to put into this, the quick and dirty is just thinking through yourself and speaking to key people like the CEO and really understanding the story of how you were founded, and the problems of today. The next step is to look at your competitors. And I love to do this exercise of writing your own who, what, why, how, and then go to your competitors' sites and see if you can pull out their who, what, why, how. See if you can tell what category they think they're in, and you will start to see this sea of sameness. And at Passport, we did an exercise of, creating a spreadsheet. We had about 20 different competitors actually, and we created this who, what, why, how. And then we created like a summary of a description of the categories that people said they were in. And then we pulled out some things that we thought people weren't talking about or were talking about. And then I created a sin bin of shoot me dead if I ever use these phrases in my marketing. Then a more expensive version, which takes a little longer, but this is like an ideal way of doing it, is what we did at Valitor was we did a strategic insight study. Now that was a step process of we did the internal interviews, we did the competitor analysis, we interviewed some industry experts, and actually we've been doing that at Passport, testing our new messaging on some industry experts. But then we also did interviews, 55 end customer interviews, and that's the ideal, because you're really talking to the people who are consuming your products and understanding what's important to them and understanding what messages resonate, what are their pain points. So that's in an ideal world, you would do some end user research, but if you haven't got the time or the resources to do that, talking internally and looking at your competitors are still great things to do if you can't afford the time of the customer insights, the customer interviews.
And I believe that with your experience, you have experience developing personas. And my question is, within B2B, when you talk about sameness, so let's talk about commodities. Is it easier to use personas in a commodity space versus something that's highly complex, a long sales cycle, that you really need solution engineers versus selling, let's say, a telephone subscription? So is there a difference between using personas? When does it make sense, and when is there a better alternative? And if there is one, what would that alternative be for that complex sale?
So I strongly believe in personas to bring your segmentation to life, regardless of whether it's B2B or B2C. So always start with getting the segment first, and then because we're selling to real people, whether that's in B2B or B2C, ideally you would then create personas where you put yourself in the shoes of those people. What does a day in their life look like? What kind of problems are they dealing with? You know, how can you bring your product or solution into their daily life? You've got to do that without overdoing it. And an example I love is where somebody said they came up with this brilliant category of picky choosers. I think it was to do with the food industry. They said picky choosers. And we're like, God, that's genius, picky choosers. But you try going to like a database company or, you know, and saying, yeah, can I, you know, have the contact details of all your picky choosers, please? So there's got to be, it's a great way to bring to, personas are a great way to sort of bring to life those segments and create real people and give them names and, you know, maybe some nice graphics. But you can't go overboard, because otherwise you're never going to identify those people and you're never going to make it off the shelf. And of course with B2B, it's not just going to be one persona. There's going to be a whole number of personas. So you've got to think realistically, how much can we tailor our messaging? You know, we're selling to 6 different people, so, and the messaging might be different in every vertical. So do it as far as it makes sense without getting into, you know, it's got to be actionable. You can overdo it and then it just becomes unimplementable.
Yeah, and would you say are the tools that a researcher might use for compiling data for B2B versus B2C, are they similar? Are they different?
I don't think they're that different. I think the sample sizes obviously are very different in B2C compared to B2B, but I think the tools and the methodologies are pretty much the same. It's just the scale.
Okay, so once you've gone through all the planning and the different phases, you've done your personas, but at some point you need to create actionable insight. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so an insight is only actionable if you can do something with it, and if it's telling you something you didn't already know, or it's it's contradicting something you thought, or it's really validating something you thought to a new level. So that's what I mean by actionable. It's being able to, it's giving you new knowledge that you didn't have before, and you can do something.
Humano, por favor, no bebas alcohol. Porque si beber alcohol te hace alcohólico, beber Fanta.
That was a bot, I think.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice bit of artificial intelligence there.
Yeah, I don't think that's usable data for us, but anyway.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about. Yeah, no, me too. I think we were just talking about, you know, how to B2B versus B2C, and you said, in fact, they're very similar.
Yes, and we were talking about actionable insights, weren't we? And, you know, that it should be telling you something new and different that you didn't know before.
Yep. Okay. So in your book, you talk a lot about examples. That's how we remember stories. And you've already shared one. But can you also highlight some of your other favorite case studies, specific challenges that occur and how they manage them, and things that we can learn from?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's like asking you to pick your favorite children, isn't it? When you say, what are your favorite case studies? But I still have some favorites. So one of them was from China, actually. It was a mixed-use development, and they wanted to create something for the city. And Mark Schaefer talks in his book, Marketing Rebellion, of being of the city, not in the city. You know, how do you get that sort of heart and emotional connection? And they went and sort of really spoke to people in the city, and what they discovered is that it was a very sort of creative and entrepreneurial spirit within the city, but people didn't have an opportunity to showcase their talents. So they created these kind of pods within their mixed-use development building that enabled people to, almost like, I guess, what we'd call pop-ups. And it was just phenomenally popular. And that was about really getting into the insights and being kind of the city, not in the city. And, you know, creating something that had an emotional connection that nobody was ever going to be able to copy. So that was one of my examples of sort of like a strong why and a purpose. And then some of my other favorite case studies were from Cisco, because they've always done amazing things with data, and they have something called next best action, which predicts the next best action to take with a particular customer. So if you think of a marketing world where instead of saying, well, I've got this campaign I want to run, who should I send this campaign to? Instead, every individual customer, according to the next best action data tool, will tell you what action you should take with that customer. So really quite clever. And then a few other little examples of watching people through a glass screen and seeing how they were navigating through, taking a journey through a website. And the journey that the people who created the website thought they would take turned out to be very different. And also doing, using biometrics to track not only where people's eyes are looking, but where their mouse is clicking. So where they're reading and where they're clicking are two different things. And often if you just look at the clicks, which we're all obsessed by clicks, aren't we? You don't actually get the full picture of what people are looking at. I mean, one of the sort of latest things is everyone's talking about now about intent data, where we can see the kind of content that people consume, which is actually more important than understanding how people search. Because you might start off by searching for something and you land on something and then you go somewhere else and then you go somewhere else. What's actually more important to know is, what kind of content are you actually consuming rather than what are you searching for? So that's just a few examples.
Okay, and the last question that I have for you. So in your book, you talk a lot about organizational challenges or skill shortages that hold companies back. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yes, actually, I'm going to, if I may, I'm just going to share my screen again. If I share the right one. So if you are looking at the
We see the data
screen,
insights action screen.
Yes, I'm going to go to just going to go quickly to the end. Sorry, getting a very fast slideshow here. I'm just going to show you this, because this is a piece of research done by London Research and Adobe. And this was the barriers. Why aren't people, if this is so obvious and so useful, why are people not using analytics and customer intelligence? And the first one, no surprise, the culture of the organization. That famous phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you're not in a company culture where you're encouraged to experiment, you're encouraged to ask questions, you're encouraged to dig deeper. Think of that Eisenhower box. If you're in a culture where it's all about the do it now, it's very urgent, don't stop and think, you're not going to get the most out of analytics and customer intelligence. The second one is the lack of skills. And I think traditionally marketing people have kind of left the analytics to the data scientists. Now the tools have been democratized. There really is no excuse. Everybody should be, to some degree, analyzing their data and analytics. Of course, you do need some tools and techniques. So that's the other one, is the lack of investment. Although, as we saw from Scott Brinker's graphic, that's the fastest growing category. But we've still got a lot of data silos. So in marketing, we don't fully own the customer. We're still struggling to join up our single view of the customer. And the other one, there's too much data. 83% of marketers are data blind. They just don't know where to start. So those are just some of the key reasons why it's not as easy as we might think.
And I think that first one, the culture of the organization, is particularly relevant for this audience, a group of highly motivated females. So do you have any advice for the females on, is there something specifically that will enable them to have a successful career in this technology marketing field?
Yeah, I mean, I would say step one is join a fantastic network such as EWPN. I can't, overstate how important that is to leverage your network. And as part of that, I've always been conscious of having mentors and having sponsors and understanding the difference between the two. So a mentor is more of a formal relationship with somebody who will give you advice. and coaching, whereas a mentor is, a sponsor is somebody that will actually give you opportunities. And I've got a couple of people who have just been amazing sponsors for me, you know, throughout my career, have really opened doors for me. So another one is just keep challenging yourself. The theme of the International Women's Day this year was choose to challenge. And if it feels too difficult to challenge others, then start with challenging yourself. You know, as I mentioned at the back of my book, I've got this section called Feed Your Brain. In actual fact, in the prologue of the book, I've got a chapter, in the prologue, it's called Break Free of Your Comfort Zone. So a few techniques and tools you can use to help break free of your comfort zone to help you challenge yourself. And get into the habit of asking questions, challenging yourself. Maybe ask yourself different questions. You know, a phrase I love to use is, don't ask who's going to let me, ask who's going to stop me. You know, so ask a different question and just try and, you know, change your perspective a bit. Yeah, just a few tips of mine.
No, it's very, very, very useful. And I fully support joining those networks. They open up a lot of doors along the way. All right, I'd like to open up for questions. I see that we already have one that came in on the chat. And the question is, how can SMEs compete with big data reservoirs of multinationals? Obviously, they do not have the same resources. Are they then always at a disadvantage?
Oh, I love that question, because I'm currently working for startups and scale-ups, and I think you have the best opportunity to create a new category, because, you know, you are small and you're nimble and you're agile. Most of the big corporates find it very difficult to change. So what I've described to you in terms of the process of asking the questions, finding your why, that's so much easier to do when you're an SME. And, you know, going back, you've got direct access to the chief exec, and you can play it back to them. Okay, have I correctly captured who we are, the category that we're in, the problems we're trying to solve? So much easier. You can go and do the research on your competitors' websites. You might not have the resources to, you know, the multinationals in terms of doing the big customer studies, but, you know, that's a luxury. There's still plenty you can do, and you'll do it an awful lot faster if you're an SME.
So the follow-up to that question is actually, you know, where to get started and what is the primary data that this startup should be looking for? You can't do everything. So if you're going to do one thing and do it well, what's the primary data they should be collecting?
So I think it depends what you're trying to achieve. You know, how startup is startup. So right from the very beginning, startup is, where's your insight coming from for your, you know, for your company? Is it coming from a market insight? Are you finding a new way to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before? Or do you have a brand new technology that's going to solve problems that people didn't even realize they had? And then going from there, if you're a bit more established, it's almost going back to revisit what are the problems you're trying to solve and how are you solving them uniquely? And use that to think about, you know, what's your big vision? How far are you on that journey to getting to that big vision? So you kind of, you put yourself in the sort of map of where you sit in the world. So if I give you an example with Passport, which is the company I'm the CMO of, it's a SaaS RegTech company, so regulatory technology, whose platform automates financial crime and compliance processes. Now, RegTech has been around after the financial crash of 2008. It was primarily set up to satisfy regulators. So kind of wave one really was about better automation of physical identity checks. So, you know, checks like a physical passport or a driving license. But and the passport's been around since 2015. But the really key difference is that we're now in a digital world where it's all about digital identity. And you're thinking about the customer experience, not just about satisfying the regulators, but also about how can you give the person who's trying to access those financial services a great experience. So then the difference becomes, you know, we're defining the next wave of RegTech, which is we're born in the digital economy. We're on a mission to digitally transform the compliance function in a way that the marketing function got transformed by marketing technology. And we're saying there doesn't have to be a compromise between satisfying the regulators and delivering this amazing customer experience. So it depends where to start. I mean, and also a great place is if you already have some customers. So, you know, we've got like 40 or 50 customers at Passport, and we've done some deep analytics to really look at all the attributes of those customers to help us go back and refine our ICP, our ideal customer profile. So that's another great place to start. Hopefully that's given some ideas. It's quite hard to say where to start, but I'm going to answer that slightly differently as well. If you think I talked about 5 categories of data, you know, customers, competitors, partners, that's another good place to start, is look at those 5 categories and think about what data you've got in those 5 categories. And finally, I'm going to say another brilliant place to start is to buy my book, because that's kind of a how-to guide. Will take you from A to Z.
And it is available on Amazon, because I checked. So the other question that's come in is, of course, there's data and there's a lot of regulation regarding, you know, what can you use, and particularly on the new iPhones, users are allowed to decline the trackers. And customers or consumers are increasingly aware of what data they share and with who. So do you see any issues there, and may data become a luxury good at some time in the future?
I actually think data will become something that is valuable. So your data about you will be something that will have a commercial value, and something that, you know, in future you might sell access to your data. And it's an interesting one. This, obviously, people have become, you know, so things like the Great Hack and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, people have become a lot more conscious of, you know, of their data. I mean, it catches me unawares every now and again. Like, this was before the pandemic. I went to a new restaurant in my local high street, and I didn't check into Facebook, so, you know, nobody knew I was in that restaurant. And I got home and I went into Facebook, and up popped a discount ad voucher for that restaurant. Completely freaked me. And I was like, oh my God, you idiot. You had geo-tracking on your phone. So your phone knew that you were in the restaurant, and therefore it's triggered a discount voucher for this restaurant. And I was suddenly like, oh my God, I'm so impressed with this restaurant that they've done this. So, you know, it catches me unaware sometimes. I'm sure we've all had the freaky moment where we've been having a conversation with someone, and our phone's been listening, and suddenly up pops an ad for that thing we've been talking about with our friend in our feed. But what I also wanted to mention is different generations have different attitudes to the giving away their data. So funnily enough, actually, the younger generation are very happy to give away their data because they know they're going to get something in return. And it's a double-edged sword. You can't, you know, hold on to your data yourself and then expect to be given a personalized, you know, relevant offer. So if you want something that's personalized and relevant, then you have to, you know, give away the cookies or give away access to the data. If you don't want anything personalized and unique, then withhold your data. But yes, I do think it will become more valuable, and I see a time where there will be a commercial value and people will sell their own data.
That sounds great to me. All right. I'll do one final round if there are any last minute questions, because we're just about out of time. Anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Well, it looks like we've answered all of the questions. So should something pop up later on, feel free to contact myself or Regina or Christine, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction. Regina, would you like to say the final words?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you found it very interesting. I know I learned quite a few new things today, and we'll be taking it back into my own life, both professionally as well as keeping a watch on who else might be listening to what I'm doing. And to Astrid and Chris, thanks again for sharing valuable insights and really peeling back the layers on this topic.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. We'll send you all today's recording in a few days, and we'll post it online. We do have many other exciting events planned, and we do have many other exciting events planned, and you can learn more about them on our website. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you soon again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.